We attempt to understand our surroundings better to protect our existence and comfort ourselves. That's just what we do. Go ahead.
What if my comfort means not protecting someone else's life? What do you? Well, I mean, you said that we make this building so that we're more comfortable, but at the same time, you said that we're supposed to prolong human life as much as we can. So, what happens if my comfort is somehow contradicted with prolonging someone else's life?
Well, if you decided that you wanted to start killing people, they would lock your ass away. I mean, that's just what people do. They protect themselves.
Yeah, I saw you.
My question's for Carlo. If God's not the only thing here, was a book that's been misinterpreted hundreds of different ways, since there's so many branches of Christianity, and also, why do you think that he couldn't just write things plain out instead of having to go back on his word in multiple different books? And then also where people have edited, especially where like he who cast without sin cast the first stone, where Jesus said that, how can you, and then people are actually taught it that Jesus actually said that when it's been shown that it was actually added later. Why do people keep continuing to preach these things that have been shown to be not actually done?
Well, I think we have a couple of questions. We just rephrase them in order. I think there was three.
Basically, why would God leave just a book that could be taken so many different ways to cause so many branches, and why do people still continue to believe when it's been shown that parts of the Bible have been edited and revised?
Well, I mean, that's an excellent question. Now, as to how God would do that, I mean, obviously, according to the Christian tradition, we can't always search the mind of God and why He does all things. And I don't think that's an illegitimate move on my part. But ultimately, I would say that the fault in these different interpretations is our sinfulness. I'm always going to appeal back to that our mind is fallen just as much as our moral character. And so our way of interpreting things quite often are skewed. What was your second question again?
Why do people continue to take the parts of the Bible that have been shown to added in later as true and other things?
Well, that's if you really trust the scholarship of all higher critical methods. Ultimately, you could say that, particularly what you were talking about, I do believe is in the first part of John 8, 1-11. It's in some of the earlier manuscripts. And so they actually put it in parentheticals saying, okay, this could possibly have been in the first, manuscript that was written of this, written by the Apostle John. But yet, I'm going to put it in parentheticals just so you know that it may have been added later. And so actually, the people that have actually, gone through the Bible and translated it and compiled it have taken special care to actually do that. Now, I know some older versions don't necessarily do that, but that's the case there. That they are actually pointing out, this may have been added later.
Okay.
This is for Chris. How do you view the life, death, and resurrection of Christ? What was your view on who He is, on Jesus Christ?
I think it's a fairy tale.
On what empirical basis?
It's a book written by people who didn't know any better.
So,
Okay, take any book. Just because it's old, we have to believe in it to be true.
Okay, well,
I mean, that's my point.
so did Jesus exist, or was there? I mean, the whole.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Are you saying that His death and resurrection was a fairy tale, or He Himself was a fairy tale?
What? I mean, do you believe that a man can rise from the dead just because it was written in an old book?
Well, I was asking, so you believe there was a man Jesus? But
Maybe, I'm sure there are plenty of people named Jesus.
Can I make one statement? Just following your logic, how do we know that it's Julius Caesar? I mean, he is part of history in some sense. We would say that. And there are monuments and statues and writings concerning him. But shouldn't we question all history if we're going to question any history at all?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so Julius Caesar possibly did not exist.
Look, there's always a chance that, that it was part, there are embellishments. And I'm not saying that the Bible's completely worthless. I think it does have historical value. It gives us an insight to how these people thought. So I wouldn't say it's completely valueless.
I have a question for both of you. I want to say I have, I have family, I have friends, and I love them a lot, and I'm happy. I don't really, let's see, how do I say this? Why do you both believe that there needs to be a purpose?
Oh, difficult. Can you just explain what you mean by purpose exactly?
Like, what Kyle had said was like, some clergyman in the 17th century may have said there, what is the purpose of life? And then you said something about there is some objective goal in mind for humanity, apparently. Why does there need to be an end goal?
I don't know that there needs to be, but we just see that this is what people do as a matter of observation. I don't believe that there is, some guiding hand or anything like that. So I don't, it could be perhaps, just comforting to think that nothing's going to happen when I'm dying, but it's also not so worrying because if death is just like before I was born, then I don't get too hung up on it.
And I'm actually going to piggyback on him. It seems to be something, once again, somewhat intrinsic in who we are. And he would appeal to science, saying that, it is, the millions of years of evolution that created the brain how it is today, and therefore we have this kind of want of purpose. It wouldn't be there if it didn't happen that way. Or possibly it was phenotype, but either way. But I would ultimately say that it is ingrained into us as being creatures made in the image of God, that we truly have purpose because He truly exists. And because He exists, and because I believe He exists, that's why I believe that there is absolute purpose in the world, because I don't believe that He's just arbitrarily moving things around without purpose.
Kyle, we may never know the meaning and purpose of life, but we know one thing, that life is created, that creation by conception in a biological sense that we all would agree to. And you have to go to Ole Miss to realize that being anything else, especially in humankind. But really, the question is, with all religions, is what happens after you die. And obviously, I think we all know we're going to die. So the real question is the afterlife. So an atheist friend of mine asked me one time, Kyle, how can your feeble mind determine your eternity or your destiny after you die? Especially when it's just an electrical chemical process, part of our biological life. And I replied, who says it was my mind to start with? Would you like to give that a little impression? What's the question?
If I understand your question, are you saying that you have reason to believe that your mind belongs to somebody else, or before you were born or something?
Yes.
I don't understand the
Can
question.
you tell me where your conscious mind originates and where would it go after death?
I can tell you to the best of my understanding, the scientific point of view is that consciousness arises out of or is a property of the structure, the material structure of the brain. And there is plenty of evidence for this. You can look at how the brain lights up depending on how someone is, their emotional state or what they're thinking about. You see simply the same patterns each time. And if you think about this, that people are born with mental disease, and we can see specific changes or differences in the brain structure that correspond to those changes or differences in mental capacity. So there's plenty of evidence to point that consciousness is a property of matter, material brain. So as far as where that goes when a person dies, it goes away, it disappears when the brain rots away. And it comes into existence when the brain grows inside the mother's body. That's my take.
All right, raise your hands. Let's go to honor code. I'm trying to figure out who's been. Mike.
Okay, so the question, what is the meaning of life, is an unfortunately ambiguous question because on one hand, it just sounds like a category mistake. I mean, life is not the kind of thing that has meaning. When the sense of meaning is something like representation or content or things like truth conditions or propositional content or meaning. In that sense, where we talk about a sentence in language or a thought having meaning. The other sense of meaning, though, is purpose. And so the question probably is better to be thought of as what is the purpose of life? And I think it is, it must be acknowledged by anyone who sort of takes a skeptical viewpoint that the answer that science tends to give us is really, we can formulate and understand these questions about transcendent purpose. But what we find in nature, whether it's through natural selection, whether it's through understanding of certain types of complex systems, whatever, doesn't really answer to that sort of question, right? But I wonder, I guess, what you would think about the following line of thought, and this comes from philosopher Thomas Nagel in a paper called The Absurd, where he's writing about this very question, and worried about, well, if the world, we take this naturalistic scientific thing, we have to say the answer to that question about the meaning of life is there is nothing. But Nagel does point out that, look, it's only because we are complex enough beings that we, with a certain kind of self-awareness, which presumably, to a large extent, is understood currently in scientific terms, that we are even able to ask or get worried about this question about transcendent meaning. And so just, does it help at all to appreciate that that's